The afternoon sun poured down Main Street like liquid honey, casting long shadows across the dusty thoroughfare of Stone Ridge, Colorado. It was September of 1874, and the air hung heavy with the scent of horses and dried earth and something else entirely, something that felt like fate. Every conversation on that street died in the same moment. Every head turned toward the same impossible sight. Because kneeling in the red dust of Main Street, her navy blue traveling dress, covered in weeks of trail grime, was a young woman who had clearly lost her mind. Or perhaps found her courage. Her honey blonde hair had come loose from its pins, falling in tangled waves around a heart-shaped face that was pale with exhaustion. Soft tendrils framed her temples, catching the golden afternoon light despite the dirt and desperation that clung to her like a second skin. Her hands were trembling. Her shoulders shook with the effort of holding herself upright. But her eyes, dear God, her eyes. Those cornflower blue eyes burned with something far more powerful than fear. They burned with the kind of desperation that transforms ordinary people into either heroes or corpses. And the man she was begging had made corpses of better men than most. Please marry me. 3 words, just 3 words cutting through the afternoon silence like a gunshot. Sawyer Callahan sat motionless atop his black horse, a figure carved from stone and shadow, in 5 years of bitter solitude. He stood 6 feet 5 in his boots, lean and muscular in the way of men who had been forged by hardship rather than built by vanity. His fair skin was deeply tanned and weathered by wind and time. A strong, square jaw bore 2 or 3 days of stubble, and high, prominent cheekbones gave his face the look of something carved rather than born. But it was his eyes that made strong men look away. Those intense, piercing amber eyes, the color of good whiskey held up to firelight, carried a weight that spoke of things done and things lost and things that could never be undone. His dark blonde hair fell in natural waves, medium length and tousled, streaked with lighter highlights from endless days under the Colorado sun. A brown, wide-brimmed cowboy hat, sweat-stained at the bands, shadowed his face. His powerful forearms, visible where his sleeves were rolled to the elbows, showed the veins and calluses of honest labor. An old scar crossed his left knuckles, pale against the tan. This was the man they called the Devil of Stone Ridge, the man who had killed 3 men in a single night, the man every soul in this valley feared to even look at wrong, and a stranger was kneeling before him asking him to be her husband. Get out of the way. His voice was low and flat, the kind of voice that did not ask twice. It carried no anger, no curiosity, nothing but the absolute certainty that he would be obeyed. She did not move. I cannot. Her voice cracked but did not break. I have nowhere else to go. Behind her, the town watched like spectators at a public execution. Old Jackson, the blacksmith, stood frozen mid-swing at his forge, his hammer suspended in air. The shopkeeper's wife clutched her basket so tight her knuckles went white. 2 children, playing in the street, were yanked inside by their mother, the door slamming shut with the sound of a coffin lid closing. Someone gasped from the boardwalk. Probably Mrs. Henderson. That woman gasped at everything, but this time the gasp was warranted. Sawyer leaned forward in the saddle, his scarred hands gripping the reins with the easy confidence of a man who had spent more of his life on horseback than off it. You drunk? No. Crazy? Maybe. She swallowed hard, and he watched her throat work with the effort. But I am also out of options. He studied her face with the careful attention of a man who had learned to read people the hard way. Young, perhaps 23 or 24. Too young to have that kind of exhaustion carved into her features. Her dress had been quality, once the kind of fabric that came from Philadelphia or Boston, but now it was stained with God knows what and torn at the hem. Her hands, though trembling, were not the hands of a working woman. Soft, uncalloused, cared for. She came from money, and she was running from something. I do not know you, Sawyer said. I know. Her voice steadied just a fraction, drawing strength from somewhere deep inside herself. But I know who you are. Everyone does. Then you know I am not the marrying kind. I know you are the kind of man who does not ask questions. She took a small step closer to the horse, and Sawyer's hand moved instinctively toward his hip before he caught himself. She noticed the movement but did not flinch. That told him something. She was more afraid of whatever was behind her than whatever stood before her. I know you live alone, lives. While she continued, I know you do not care what this town thinks, and I know. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper carried on the afternoon breeze like a prayer or a curse. I know you are the only person in 3 counties who might say yes. Silence fell over Main Street, the kind of silence that hurt to stand in, the kind of silence that preceded either salvation or damnation. Then Sheriff Marcus Garrett pushed through the gathering crowd, his badge catching the afternoon sun with a brightness that seemed almost obscene against the gravity of the moment. He was a man of 50 years, his belly just starting to go soft, his hair more gray than brown now, and his eyes held the look of someone who had learned to look away when power demanded it. Miss, I am going to need you to step away from Mr. Callahan. She did not even look at him. Her eyes stayed locked on Sawyer's blue meeting amber in a battle of wills that the entire street could feel. Please, and she said one more time, I will work. I will earn my keep. I will not ask for anything else. Just give me somewhere to go before dark. That is enough. Garrett put a hand on her arm, and she flinched. Not the flinch of someone startled by unexpected contact. This was the flinch of a hunted animal, instinctive and wild, and full of the kind of terror that spoke of old wounds and recent horrors. She nearly fell, and for just a moment the mask of courage she wore slipped away completely. Sawyer saw it, the pure fear in her eyes, not fear of him, fear of something else, someone else, and something in his chest, something he thought had died long ago in a small bedroom where a 15-year-old girl had taken her last breath while he was miles away chasing cattle began to stir. Sheriff, Sawyer's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. Let her go. Garrett froze. Sawyer, this woman is clearly disturbed. I said let her go. No threat was spoken. None was needed. The voice of Sawyer Callahan was threat enough. The sheriff's hand dropped. Sawyer looked down at the woman again. Really looked at her this time. He saw the way she held herself despite the trembling, her shoulders back, her chin lifted. He saw the way tears were building in her eyes, but refusing to fall, held back by sheer force of will. He saw the way she stood there in front of the whole damn town and asked for the one thing no one should have to beg for: help. He had seen that look before, 10 years ago, in the eyes of his sister Lily when she had begged him not to go. Please, brother, do not go. I'm scared. I feel unwell. It is just a cold, Lily. I will be back in a few days. He had not come back in time. When he returned, Lily was already in her coffin, 15 years old, dead of fever, alone. Sawyer dismounted. The movement was slow and deliberate, like a man approaching a wild horse that might bolt at any sudden motion. He stood a good foot taller than the woman, and when he looked down at her, she had to tilt her head back just to meet his eyes. What is your name? He asked. Clara. She said it like it was the last thing she owned. Clara Mercer. Where did you come from, Miss Mercer? Philadelphia. She wiped her cheek quickly, almost angrily, as if ashamed of the tears that threatened to fall. I came here to get married. A few people in the crowd murmured. Sawyer ignored them. So where is your husband? Her face hardened into something that looked almost like iron wrapped in lace. Gone, with every dollar I brought. She straightened her shoulders, drawing herself up to her full height, which still left her looking up at him. He told me to wait at the hotel, said he would be back by morning. That was 3 days ago. The hotel owner says if I do not pay by tonight, he is calling the law on me for fraud. Sheriff Garrett cleared his throat. That nervous sound men make when they want to assert authority they do not feel. Now, Miss Mercer, I am sure we can sort this out in a civilized. Can you? She rounded on him, and the fire in her voice made half the crowd take a step back. This was not a woman defeated. This was a woman cornered, and cornered women were dangerous in ways that cornered men could never match. Can you get my money back? Can you make a man who does not exist anymore pay for what he stole? Can you? Her voice broke cracking like ice on a spring pond. Can you give me anywhere to go that is not back to the family who told me I was a burden? The sheriff had nothing to say to that. Nobody did. Sawyer looked at her, looked at the town standing around watching like this was some kind of show for their entertainment, looked down at his own hands, hands that had killed men, had dug graves, had built a life of solitude, because he believed he deserved nothing better. Then he heard his own voice saying words he had not planned to speak. You can ride. Clara nodded quickly, hope flickering in those cornflower eyes like a candle in a storm. I grew up on a farm. Before my father became wealthy, we lived on my grandfather's land in Pennsylvania. I know horses. Then get on the horse. The entire street erupted. Voices rose in protest and shock, in outrage, overlapping like waves crashing against a rocky shore. Sawyer, you cannot be serious. Mr. Callahan, this is highly irregular. Someone needs to talk sense into that man. But Sawyer was not listening. He had already pulled himself back into the saddle. He held out his hand to Clara, and after only a second of hesitation, a second where her entire life seemed to flash across her eyes, she took it. Her hand was smaller than he expected, warmer. He pulled her up behind him in one smooth motion, and she wrapped her arms around his waist to keep from falling. She was shaking. He could feel it through his coat, through his shirt, all the way down to his bones. Hold tight, he said. Then he kicked the horse into motion, and they left Stone Ridge in a cloud of red dust and shocked silence. They rode for 20 minutes before Sawyer spoke again. You can let go now. Clara realized she was still gripping his coat like her life depended on it. She loosened her hold but did not let go completely. The trail was rocky, winding through the scrubland and around massive boulders that looked like sleeping giants, and she was not confident enough in her balance to risk it. Where are we going? She asked. My ranch, Blackwood Ranch. How far? Another hour. She fell silent again. The landscape around them was beautiful in a harsh kind of way. All red rocks and twisted pine trees and mountains that looked close enough to touch but never seemed to get any nearer. Snow still capped the highest peaks despite the warmth of the valley below, and the afternoon light painted everything in shades of gold and amber. It reminded her of everything she had left behind in Philadelphia. The certainty, the safety, the life she had thrown away because she had been stupid enough to believe a stranger's promises. What was his name? Sawyer asked suddenly. What? The man who stole from you. What was his name? Clara swallowed around the lump in her throat. Thomas Brennan. At least that is what he told me. Describe him. Tall, about 30 years old, brown hair, brown eyes, had a scar on his left hand, said he got it working cattle. She paused, remembering the charming smile that had hidden the thief's heart. He seemed so genuine. He wrote me letters for 3 months before I agreed to come west. He said he had a homestead, said he was looking for a wife to build a life with. And you believed him. I had no reason not to. Her voice hardened with old anger, and I had every reason to leave Philadelphia. Why? She was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, that is a story for another time. Sawyer did not push. He understood about stories that needed time. If he shows up in Stone Ridge again, Sawyer said, I want to know who to shoot. She could not tell if he was joking. His voice gave nothing away. It was flat and matter-of-fact, like he was discussing the weather or the price of feed. You do not have to do that, she said quietly. Did not say I would. Said I wanted to move from. Why I steal? Because men who steal from women are cowards. His voice carried no emotion, just simple truth. And cowards should know better than to come back to places where they are known. Something in her chest loosened, not much, but enough to let her breathe a little easier. Thank you, she whispered. Do not thank me yet. You have not seen where you are staying. The ranch appeared as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed almost too beautiful to be real. It sat in a valley between two ridges surrounded by open grazing land that stretched all the way to the tree line. The house itself was small, just one story built from rough-hewn logs and granite stone. It was the kind of structure that had been built to endure to withstand harsh winters and long years, and the kind of solitude that would break weaker men. There was a large barn, a corral for livestock, a storage shed, and what looked like a chicken coop in the back. Thin smoke rose from the chimney, a sign of life. But what struck Clara most was the isolation. Looking in every direction, she saw nothing but wilderness and mountains. You live out here alone, she asked. That is the point. He dismounted and held up a hand to help her down. Her legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground. Hours on horseback after days of walking had left her body screaming in protest, but she forced herself to stand straight. She would not show him weakness. Not now. Sawyer led the horse into the barn, without a word leaving her standing in the yard. Clara looked around slowly. The sun was sinking fast now, painting everything in shades of gold and shadow. In the distance, she could hear cattle lowing. A hawk circled overhead, patient and cold. It was beautiful. It was also terrifying, because she was alone with a man she did not know, a man the entire town called a killer, in a place where no one could hear her scream. And she had put herself there willingly. What have I done? You coming inside, or you planning to sleep out here? Sawyer's voice made her jump. He was standing in the doorway of the house, silhouetted against the lamplight inside. She could not see his face, could not read his expression. He was just a shape, a shadow, a question she had no answer for. Clara took a breath. Then she walked toward him. The inside of the house was not what she expected. Clean, neat, sparse but well kept. Not the lair of a killer, but the home of a man who knew how to take care of himself. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, flames crackling gently within. A solid oak table and 4 chairs sat near the window. A small kitchen area held a wood stove, a sink with a hand pump, and shelves lined with canned goods and bags of flour. But what made Clara freeze in the doorway was not the house itself. It was the 2 men sitting at the table. The first was enormous, perhaps the largest man Clara had ever seen in her life. He stood at least 6'6" with shoulders twice the width of a normal man, and a chest and arms that strained the seams of the weathered brown leather vest he wore open over bare tan skin. His dark chestnut hair fell past his ears, and a short, neatly trimmed beard covered a jaw that could have been carved from granite. His eyes were the color of storm clouds before a violent tempest, and they held the kind of darkness that came from seeing too much death. A long, faded scar ran from his right shoulder down his arm, a relic of some battle that had marked him forever. He looked perhaps 29 years old, but his eyes were ancient. This was Gideon Holt. Clara did not know his name yet, but she recognized the look in his eyes. She had seen it in the eyes of soldiers who had returned from the war. Men who had seen too much killed too much and never truly left the battlefield. The second man was older, perhaps 41, with a wiry build that had been hardened by decades of labor. His angular face was clean-shaven, with deep lines around his eyes that spoke not of age, but of someone who had laughed much, wept much, and survived both. His auburn hair fell past his collar with touches of gray at the temples, tied back loosely with a leather cord. A faded red bandana was knotted around his neck, and his dark brown eyes, almost black in the lamplight, observed everything with the calm of someone who had lived through his worst day and found peace on the other side. This was Emmett Cole. Both men stood when she entered. Sawyer, Gideon's voice was deep as thunder rolling across distant mountains. You brought company. Gideon, Emmett. Sawyer nodded toward Clara. This is Clara Mercer. She will be staying here for a while. Gideon's storm gray eyes narrowed. Staying while, long story. I have time. She does not. Sawyer removed his hat and hung it on a hook near the door. She needs rest food and a place where no one asks questions. That is what she is getting. A tense silence stretched between the three men. Clara could feel the weight of unspoken words of histories she did not know and bonds she did not understand. Then Emmett, the older man, stepped forward. He moved with the calm of someone who had nothing left to fear, nothing left to prove. Miss Mercer. His voice was warm and steady, like a deep lake on a windless day. I am Emmett Cole. Been working this ranch for 15 years, ever since Sawyer's father owned it. He gestured toward Gideon. That mountain over there is Gideon Holt. He looks mean, but he makes the best coffee in 3 counties. Also the best stew, though he will deny it. Gideon shot Emmett a look that suggested he did not appreciate the introduction. I do not deny it. I just do not advertise it. Clara did not know what to say. She had prepared herself for one frightening man. She had not prepared for 3. She began. She can have my room tonight. Sawyer cut in. I will bunk with you 2 in the barn. Like hell you will. Gideon's growl seemed to shake the rafters. Your back will not survive another night on hay bales. You were limping for a week after the last time. Then I will sleep on the floor. Sawyer, this is not a debate. Emmett and Gideon exchanged a look, the kind of look that only men who had lived and worked together for years could understand. Then Emmett sighed. Let me clear out the storage room in the barn. There is Morrison's old bed in there still usable. The frame is solid oak. Sawyer can sleep there and Miss Mercer can use the room inside. Sawyer wanted to argue. Clara could see it in the set of his jaw and the tension in his shoulders. But Emmett just looked at him with those calm brown eyes, and somehow the argument ended before it began. Fine, Sawyer nodded curtly, but bolt the door after I go out, and do not open it for anyone but me. How will I know it is you? Because anyone else who shows up here will not knock. Later that night, after Clara had eaten 3 bowls of stew that tasted like the best thing she had ever put in her mouth, after she had washed her face in warm water and collapsed onto the narrow bed in the small room, she found she could not sleep. It was not fear that kept her awake. Or perhaps it was fear, but not the kind she expected. She lay in the darkness listening to the sounds of this unfamiliar place. Wind whistling through gaps in the logs. The distant call of an owl. The creak of the barn doors as someone moved around outside. She thought about the man who had brought her here, about the way he had looked at her on Main Street, reading her like a book, written in a language only he understood, about the way he had stepped between her and the sheriff, without hesitation, without explanation, without asking anything in return. What kind of man did that? What kind of man brought a stranger into his home, gave her his bed, protected her from a threat he did not even fully understand? A knock on the door made her sit up quickly, heart pounding. Miss Mercer, you awake? It was Emmett's voice, quiet and gentle. Yes. Thought you might want some warm milk. Helps with sleeping. My wife Mary used to make it for our daughter when she had nightmares. She opened the door to find him standing there with a tin cup steam rising from the surface. He looked different in the lamplight, older and wearier, but also kinder. His dark eyes held a depth of compassion that seemed out of place in this harsh land. Thank you. She took the cup and wrapped her cold fingers around its warmth. Do not let Gideon scare you. Emmett leaned against the door frame. He barks more than he bites, though between you and me he does bite occasionally, usually just people who deserve it. I am not scared. The words came out before she could stop them. I am just not used to people trusting me so quickly. Emmett was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You know, I used to have a daughter, Sarah. She would be about your age now if God had seen fit to let her stay. Clara looked up. Used to, fever, 8 years ago this October. Emmett's voice held no pain anymore. It had moved past that point long ago. The pain had become something else, something quieter, something that lived in the bones rather than the heart. My wife Mary went first. She was the strongest woman I ever knew. But the fever did not care about strength. Sarah followed a week later. I buried them both on the hill behind the barn where they can see the sunrise every morning. I am sorry. Do not be sorry. It is just life. Emmett looked out the window at the darkened landscape where moonlight painted the mountains silver. 12 years I had with Mary. 12 years happier than any man deserves. And 8 years with Sarah, watching her grow from a baby into a young woman who had her mother's laugh and my stubborn streak. That is more than some people get in a lifetime. But you are still here. I am still here, Emmett nodded slowly, because Mary would want me to live, not just exist, really live. Find joy when I can, help when I can, love when I can. He looked at Clara. That is why I stay here with Sawyer and Gideon. Because they need someone to remind them that life is still worth living. And now I am here too. Now you are here too. Emmett smiled, a sad and wise expression. And I think you came for a reason, Clara. Not just to be saved, but to save someone else. She did not understand what he meant at the time, but she would remember those words later when the flood came, when everything fell apart, when she had to make a decision that would shape the rest of her life. Clara was silent for a moment. Then she asked the question that had been burning in her mind since she stepped in front of that horse. What kind of man is Mr. Callahan really? Emmett's dark eyes warmed with something that looked almost like affection. Sawyer Callahan is the best man I have ever known, and also the loneliest. He paused, gathering words that clearly did not come easy. He lost his sister 10 years ago, Lily, 15 years old, sweetest girl you ever met, with brown eyes that could light up a room. She died of fever while Sawyer was out working cattle 3 days' ride away. He never forgave himself. That was not his fault. Tell him that. Emmett straightened up. Sawyer thinks he chose work over family, that his choice killed her. So he punishes himself by living alone, by not letting anyone get close, by becoming the monster this town already thinks he is. He looked at Clara. In 5 years since he stopped talking to anyone in town, you are the first person he has ever brought home. Clara did not know what to say to that, so she just nodded. Get some sleep, Miss Mercer. Tomorrow is going to be a long day. After Emmett left, Clara lay back down and stared at the ceiling. Sawyer Callahan, the devil of Stone Ridge, the killer, but also the man who had lost his sister and never recovered. The man who had seen her desperation and chosen to help instead of turning away. The man who had given her a safe place, however temporary, when the whole world seemed to be closing in. She did not know what to think of him. But for the first time in weeks, when she closed her eyes, she did not dream of her father, did not dream of Victoria, did not dream of asylum walls closing in around her. She dreamed of amber whiskey eyes, and she slept. Clara woke to the smell of strong coffee and gray dawn light filtering through the small window. For a moment, she did not know where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The street, the horse, the ranch, the 3 men. She sat up quickly, heart racing. Someone was moving around in the main room. She could hear footsteps, the clatter of pots, the crackle of a fresh fire being stoked. She dressed quickly in her ruined dress, the only clothes she had, and stepped out. Sawyer was at the stove, his back to her. In the gray morning light, he looked different somehow, more human. His dark blonde hair was tousled from sleep, and he moved with the easy efficiency of a man who had done this same routine 1,000 times. He was 32 years old, but in this moment, he looked both younger and older than his age. There is a basin in the bedroom, he said without turning around. Water is still warm if you want to wash up. Emmett heated it before he went out to check the cattle. What time is it? Near 7. You let me sleep. You needed it. He poured coffee into 2 tin cups. You will need your strength today. Why? He turned finally and held out one of the cups. His face was unreadable, all sharp angles and shadow. In the growing light, she could see the stubble on his jaw, the wariness around his eyes, the way he held himself like a man perpetually ready for a fight. Because if you are going to stay here, you are going to work. And on a ranch, work starts at dawn. She took the coffee. It was strong enough to strip paint, but somehow it tasted perfect. I told you I would work. Saying it and doing it are different things. He set down his cup. Finish your coffee, then meet me in the barn. He left before she could respond. The barn was larger than it looked from outside. 6 stalls, though only 3 held horses. The rest of the space was filled with equipment, hay bales, and enough tools to build a second house. Sawyer was already mucking out one of the stalls with efficient practice movements. His sleeves were rolled up, revealing powerful forearms corded with veins and marked with old scars. Grab a shovel, he said without looking up. Clara found one hanging on the wall and moved to the next stall. The horse inside a massive bay with a white star on its forehead, and wild eyes looked at her with pure suspicion. His ears flattened, his hooves stamped the ground. His name is Thunder, Sawyer said. He bites. Good to know. I am serious. He has taken chunks out of 3 different ranch hands. Gideon is the only one he tolerates, and even Gideon has scars to show for it. Then why do you keep him? Because when it matters, he is faster than anything else in the valley, and because nobody else wanted him. Sawyer paused. Found him half-starved 3 years ago, abandoned by some prospector who could not handle him. Everyone said I should shoot him, but there was something in his eyes. Clara studied the horse. Thunder snorted and pawed at the ground, clearly unimpressed by her presence. But she had grown up with horses. Before her father became wealthy and moved the family to the Philadelphia mansion, she had lived on her grandfather's farm in Pennsylvania. She knew horses. She understood them. And she knew that the most vicious horses were often the most frightened. Can I touch him? She asked. If you want to lose a finger. She ignored the warning and slowly extended her hand toward Thunder's nose. The horse's ears flattened, a clear sign of threat. Miss Mercer. Shh. Clara kept her hand steady, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. It is all right. I am not going to hurt you. I know what it is like to be abandoned. I know what it is like to have everyone give up on you. Thunder stared at her. She stared back. And in that moment, something passed between them. A silent understanding between 2 creatures who had been treated badly by the world and learned not to trust anyone. Thunder's nostrils flared. He took one step closer, then another. And then so gently it was almost imperceptible, his nose bumped against her palm. Sawyer stopped working and stared. Clara smiled, the first real smile she had worn in days, and gently stroked Thunder's nose. There is a good boy. You are not so scary, are you? You just needed someone who was not afraid of you. That is impossible. Sawyer's voice was flat with disbelief. What? That horse hates everyone. Maybe he just needed someone who understood him. Clara looked at Sawyer over Thunder's head, her cornflower eyes meeting his whiskey amber ones. Sound familiar? For the first time since she had met him, the corners of Sawyer Callahan's mouth twitched upward. Not quite a smile, but close. Get to work, he said instead, but his voice had lost its edge. By noon, Clara's hands were covered in blisters. By 3 in the afternoon, her back was screaming. By sunset, she could barely stand. But she did not complain. Not once, Wadawan. Sawyer watched her out of the corner of his eye as they worked through the list of chores. Feeding the horses, repairing a section of fence, hauling water from the creek, chopping wood for the stove. She fell twice, dropped things 3 times, nearly got kicked by Thunder's stablemate. But every time she stumbled, she got back up. Every time she failed, she tried again. And every time he expected her to quit, she just set her jaw and kept going. That night after dinner, Clara fell asleep at the table before she could finish eating. Sawyer watched her for a long moment, the way her honey blonde hair fell across her face, the way exhaustion had softened her features, the way she had worked herself to the bone without complaint because she had said she would. He stood quietly, moved across the room, and lifted her as gently as he could manage. She stirred but did not wake, just mumbled something incoherent and curled against his chest. She weighed nothing, felt like he could break her with one wrong move. He carried her to the bedroom and laid her on the bed, pulling the blanket over her. She sighed in her sleep and turned onto her side, her face finally peaceful. Sawyer backed out of the room and closed the door. Then he sat on the sofa, poured himself a drink he did not want, and stared at the fire until the sun came up. 3 days passed. The pattern repeated itself. Dawn to dusk work, silent sleep. Clara learned the rhythm of ranch life faster than anyone expected. She figured out which animals needed gentle handling and which needed a firm hand. She learned to start the wood stove without burning herself. She even managed to patch a section of fence without anyone having to redo it. Thunder the horse, that hated everyone, began following her around the barn like a loyal dog. Gideon watched this with narrowed eyes but said nothing. Emmett watched with a knowing smile. But on the fourth day, everything changed. Sheriff Marcus Garrett appeared on the horizon, riding fast enough to create a dust cloud visible for miles. Clara was in the garden, what passed for a garden anyway, trying to coax life from soil that looked like it had not seen water in years. She heard the hoofbeats before she saw the rider. Then she heard Sawyer's voice, cold as mountain ice. "You are on private property, Sheriff. Need to talk to you, Sawyer." Garrett dismounted, his hand resting on his gun belt, not threatening, just present. "Heard some interesting news in town." "Then you have wasted a trip. I do not care what they are saying. They are saying you got married to the woman who stopped you in the street, the one who was begging the strangers for help." Garrett's voice rose with righteous indignation. "Sawyer, you do not even know her." "I know enough. Do you, because I did some asking around, sent a telegraph to Philadelphia." The sheriff paused, letting the words sink in. "There is no record of a Clara Mercer anywhere in the city registry. No family, no employment history, nothing." Clara's heart stopped. She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her hands, and walked around the side of the house. Both men turned to look at her. "That is because Mercer is not my real name," she said quietly. Sawyer's eyes narrowed. "What?" "It is my mother's maiden name. I used it when I left Philadelphia because my father told me if I ever contacted the family again, he would have me arrested for theft." She lifted her chin, meeting the sheriff's suspicious gaze with something that looked like iron wrapped in silk. "He claimed I stole jewelry that belonged to my mother. I did not. But he is a federal judge and I am nobody. So who do you think they would believe?" Garrett's hand moved closer to his gun. "So you are a fugitive." "I am a woman who left a bad situation." Her voice did not shake. "If that makes me a criminal in your eyes, Sheriff, then I suppose you had better arrest me. But you should know that I will not go quietly." "Nobody is arresting anyone." Sawyer stepped between them, his body a wall. "She is my wife now. That makes her my responsibility, not yours." "Your wife," Garrett's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "You married her without knowing her real name." "I married her because she needed help and I had room to spare." Sawyer's voice dropped to a dangerous low. "And unless you have got a warrant, Sheriff, you need to leave, now." Garrett stared at both of them for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "You are making a mistake, Sawyer. Would not be my first." The sheriff mounted his horse and rode away without another word. But the look he gave Clara before he left said everything. This is not over. Sawyer waited until Garrett was out of sight before turning to her. "What is your real name?" "Clara Weston." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the afternoon sun. "My father is Judge Harold Weston, Federal Court, Eastern District of Pennsylvania. My mother died when I was 15. He remarried 6 months later, and his new wife made it very clear that I was not welcome. She paused, gathering the strength to continue. When I turned 23, I asked for my inheritance, the money my mother left me. He said I had already spent it. I had not touched a penny, so I took my mother's pearl necklace, the only thing I had left of her, and I sold it. Used the money to pay the mail-order bride agency and buy a train ticket west. And the jewelry he accused you of stealing was my mother's necklace. Her voice hardened into something cold. He wanted it back so he could give it to his new wife, Victoria. When I refused, he threatened to ruin me. So I ran. Sawyer was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You should have told me." Would it have changed anything? No. He looked at her steadily. But lies have a way of catching up to people. And when they do, they usually bring company. I am sorry. Do not be sorry. Just do not lie to me again. He turned back toward the barn. Real name or fake, you are still Clara Callahan now. That means something in. She watched him walk away, his shoulders stiff with the anger he was too controlled to show. Sawyer, she called out. He stopped but did not turn. Thank you for standing between me and the sheriff. That is what husbands do, he said, and then he was gone. Clara stood alone in the yard, the sun beating down on her shoulders, and felt a chill run down her spine despite the warmth. Because she had told him part of the truth, but not all of it. She had not told him that her father did not just want her back. He wanted her destroyed, declared insane, locked away in an asylum where she would never see daylight again or tell anyone the truth about what he had done, about the money he had stolen from her mother's estate, about the lies he had told the courts, about the woman he had married who was helping him cover it all up. And if Sheriff Garrett had sent a telegraph to Philadelphia, then her father already knew where she was. Far away on a train rolling toward Colorado, a woman with perfectly styled dark hair and lips painted red as blood was reading a telegram. Found her, Stone Ridge, Colorado, awaiting orders. Victoria Weston smiled, a smile cold as the grave. Finally, she whispered. Finally. She folded the telegram and looked out of the window where the landscape was rushing past like a dream. The girl had run far enough, and this time Victoria would make sure she never ran again. 2 weeks had passed since Sheriff Garrett's visit, and life at Blackwood Ranch had settled into a rhythm that Clara never thought she would find peace in. Each dawn arrived with the smell of Gideon's coffee, strong enough to wake the dead, as Emmett often joked. Sawyer would already be outside checking fences or tending to the cattle before the sun crested the mountains. Emmett would prepare a simple breakfast while humming old songs his wife Mary used to love. And Clara, who had once been the daughter of a federal judge who had lived in a Philadelphia mansion with servants and 5-course dinners, was learning to become a woman of the frontier. The morning sun was just beginning to warm the clearing behind the barn when Sawyer's voice cut through her concentration. "You are holding it wrong again." Clara adjusted her grip on the heavy Colt revolver, the weapon feeling foreign and cold in her hands. They stood in the open space far enough from the house that the noise would not spook the horses. A row of old tin cans lined up on a fallen log served as targets, glinting in the early light. "I am holding it exactly how you showed me," she protested. "No, you are gripping it like it is going to bite you." Sawyer moved closer, his presence solid and warm behind her. His hands settled on her arms, adjusting her stance with practiced precision. "Relax your shoulders." "I cannot." "Yes, you can." He leaned in, his breath warm against her ear. "Breathe. The gun is not your enemy. Fear is." Clara inhaled deeply and tried again. The target seemed impossibly far away, small and mocking in the distance. "Now squeeze, do not pull. Squeeze long." She squeezed. The gunshot cracked through the morning air, and the recoil nearly knocked her backward. Sawyer's hand steadied her, but the bullet went wide by at least 3 feet. "Again," he said. She raised the gun and fired. Missed. Fired again. Missed. By the 10th shot, her hands were shaking and her ears were ringing, and frustration burned hot in her chest. I cannot do this, she said, lowering the weapon. You are doing it right now. I am failing. You are learning. Sawyer took the gun from her hands and reloaded it with practiced efficiency, his movement smooth and sure. Failing is part of learning. You think I hit every target the first time I picked up a gun? You probably did. I shot my own foot the first time. Something close to warmth flickered in his eyes. Could not walk right for a month. My father laughed so hard he nearly choked. He was a school teacher back in Massachusetts before he came west, and he said it was the best lesson he ever gave me. Clara stared at him. You are lying. I am not. The ghost of humor touched his voice. Everyone starts somewhere, Clara. The difference between the people who survive and the people who do not is that the survivors keep trying after they fail. She looked down at the gun in her hands, then back at the tin cans waiting in the distance. One more time, she said. That is my girl. The words hit her harder than the recoil ever could. My girl, as if she was something worth claiming, something that belonged to someone, something worth protecting. She raised the gun, steadied her breathing just as Sawyer had taught her, and fired. The leftmost kin flew backward off the log with a satisfying clang. Sawyer's hand came down on her shoulder, warm and solid and real. There you go. In the weeks that followed, Clara learned far more than how to shoot and ride. She learned that Gideon Holt, despite his appearance as fearsome as a grizzly bear, had the softest heart of the three men, though he would deny it to his dying breath. She caught him one evening letting the barn cat sleep in the hay, pretending he did not see them there. She noticed how he knew the name of every cow in the herd, calling them things like Old Grumpy and Mr. Lazy and Princess, because she always thought she was better than the others. And she discovered that his stew made from whatever ingredients happened to be available could bring tears to her eyes with its simple perfection. Do not tell anyone, Gideon growled one night when he caught her wiping her eyes after dinner. Got a reputation to maintain. Your secret is safe with me. Better be. I have spent years making people afraid of me. Cannot have word getting out that I cook. Why does it matter so much, the reputation, I mean? Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because when people are afraid of you, they leave you alone. And when they leave you alone, you cannot hurt them. Clara understood that more than she wanted to admit. One evening, when Sawyer and Emmett had already retired, Clara found Gideon sitting alone on the porch, staring up at the stars with a bottle of whiskey nearly empty beside him. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. Cannot sleep, she asked, settling into a chair a few feet away. Never can. Gideon took a sip. Not real sleep anyway. Just nightmares with breaks in between. The war. He looked at her, his storm-gray eyes sharp in the darkness. What do you know about war? Not much, but I know about ghosts. She was quiet for a moment. My mother died when I was 15. For years afterward, I woke every night thinking I heard her calling my name. Gideon was silent for a long time, then he spoke. Gettysburg, July of '63. His voice was flat like he was reading from a history book. I was a lieutenant, 23 years old, commanded a company of 50 men. Most of them were younger than me, kids from farms in Pennsylvania and Ohio who had never held a gun before they enlisted. What happened? Wrong orders. He stared down at the whiskey bottle. Superior officer ordered an advance on an enemy position, a position that could not be taken. I knew it. Everyone knew it. But orders were orders. He paused. 47 men dead in 15 minutes. I was one of 3 who survived. Clara did not know what to say, so she simply said, I am sorry. Do not be. Not your fault. Gideon set the bottle down. But sometimes I still see their faces, the boys I led to their deaths. They ask me why I am still alive when they are not. And what do you tell them? I cannot answer. He looked up at the stars. That is why I do not sleep. How did you end up here with Sawyer? Found me 3 years ago. I was in a saloon in Denver trying to drink myself to death. Had been trying for about 2 years at that point. Was getting pretty good at it. Gideon's voice was matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. Sawyer walked in, took one look at me, and said, "I need a man who is not afraid to die." I said, "You found him." He said, "Good, because I need help saving my cattle, not killing yourself." And he dragged me out of that saloon and put me on a horse and brought me here. Just like that. Just like that. Did not ask me any questions. Did not ask me to talk about what happened. Just gave me work to do and a place to sleep and enough purpose to keep getting up in the morning. Gideon looked at her. That is the kind of man Sawyer Callahan is. He does not save people by fixing them. He saves them by giving them something worth living for. Clara learned different things from Emmett Cole. He did not speak much about his past, but his presence was a source of calm she had never experienced before. He was the one who taught her to cook, not the elaborate meals that the chefs in Philadelphia prepared, but real food. Bread baked over fire, stew made from whatever was available, coffee brewed the proper way. The secret, Emmett said as she kneaded dough, is not to think too much. The dough knows what it wants. You just have to listen. Clara laughed. Dough does not talk. Everything talks if you know how to listen. Emmett smiled, a sad and wise expression. My wife used to say that, Mary, she could talk to anything. Trees, animals, even rocks. She said everything had a soul. She sounds like a wonderful person. She was the light of my life. Emmett looked out the window where the sun was setting in shades of orange and pink. 12 years we had together. 12 years happier than any man deserves. We met at a dance in Missouri when I was just 20 years old. She was wearing a blue dress that matched her eyes, and she laughed at my terrible jokes, and I knew right then that I was going to marry her. That is beautiful. It was. We built a life together, had Sarah, moved out west looking for new opportunities. He paused. Then God called them both back, and I thought the world had ended. But you are still here. I am still here. Emmett nodded slowly, because Mary would want me to live, not just exist, really live. Find joy when I can, help when I can, love when I can. He looked at Clara. That is why I stay here with Sawyer and Gideon, because they need someone to remind them that life is still worth living. And now I am here too. Now you are here too, Emmett smiled. And I think you came for a reason, Clara, not just to be saved, but to save someone else. She did not understand what he meant at the time, but she would remember those words later when the forehead came, when everything fell apart, when she had to make a decision that would shape the rest of her life. It was during the third week at Blackwood Ranch that the darkness found her. Clara was in town with Sawyer and Gideon, her first time returning to Stone Ridge since she had knelt in the dust of Main Street. They needed supplies, and Sawyer insisted she should not hide forever. They will talk whether you are here or not, he said. Better to let them see you and know you are not afraid. She was not sure she agreed, but she went anyway. The town was busier than she remembered. Saturday market day. Farmers from surrounding areas had come to sell their goods, buy supplies, exchange news. Main Street was crowded with wagons and pedestrians, and everyone was watching Clara. Whispers followed her like ghosts, stares barely hidden, fingers pointing behind hands. Ignore them, Sawyer said quietly, his hand resting gently at the small of her back. They have nothing better to do. Clara was trying to follow his advice when she saw the woman, standing outside the hotel, tall, elegant, wearing expensive traveling clothes that had no place in a frontier town, the kind of silk and lace worn in Philadelphia or New York, not Colorado. Dark hair perfectly styled, face carefully made up, and a smile when their eyes met across the street cold enough to make Clara feel like she was drowning in ice water. Victoria Weston, her stepmother, the woman who had convinced Clara's father that his daughter was a threat, who had planned to have her committed to an asylum, who had stolen her future and would not stop until Clara was completely destroyed. We need to leave. Right now, as Clara's hand tightened on Sawyer's arm. What is wrong? That woman, the one watching us. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. That is Victoria Weston, my father's wife. If she is here. Her breath caught. If she is here, it means my father knows exactly where I am. 2 days later, Victoria came to Blackwood Ranch. She did not come alone. Two men rode with her wearing marshal badges. One was tall with a long scar across his cheek, his eyes holding the cold calculation of a professional killer. The other was shorter, but with the same deadly look about him. Both kept their hands near their weapons. Clara was inside the house when she heard the hoofbeats. She looked through the window and her blood turned to ice. Sawyer, she called her voice trembling. He was already on the porch, Gideon and Emmett flanking him. Three men stood like a wall between the house and the intruders. Victoria pulled her reins, stopping her horse about 20 feet from the porch. Her smile, the smile Clara remembered all too well, the smile that had hidden years of psychological torture, shone as bright as if she were visiting old friends. Hello, Clara. Her voice was sweet as honey laced with poison. You have been difficult to find. Clara stepped onto the perch, standing beside Sawyer rather than behind him. She would not hide anymore. Victoria, what do you want? What I have always wanted, for you to come home and accept the help you so clearly need. Victoria tilted her head, perfectly feigned concern on her face. Your father is very worried about you. Running off like that, stealing from the family, marrying some frontier gunman without informing anyone. It is obvious you are unwell. I am perfectly well. Are you? Because the Clara I knew would never behave this way. The fever you had last year must have affected your mind more than we realized. Victoria turned to the marshals. Gentlemen, as you can see, my stepdaughter is clearly in distress. We need to take her back to Philadelphia, where she can receive proper medical care. The scarred marshal stepped forward. Mrs. Callahan, I am afraid you will have to come with us. She is not going anywhere. Sawyer moved, blocking Clara completely from view. And unless you have a warrant signed by a Colorado judge, you have no authority here. We have federal papers. I do not care if you have a letter from God himself. This is Colorado territory, and Colorado law says you need local jurisdiction to make an arrest. Sawyer's hand hovered near the Colt at his hip. So unless Sheriff Garrett is with you, and I notice he is not, you can turn around and ride back to town. Victoria laughed, a cold, brittle sound like breaking ice. How touching. The killer playing hero. She pulled a document from her saddlebag and held it up. This is a writ of extradition signed by 3 separate judges. It does not need local approval. It supersedes territorial law. And it means that if you continue to harbor my stepdaughter, you will be arrested for obstruction of justice. She paused. Or we can make this simple. Clara comes with us now peacefully, and you go back to your quiet life. No charges, no trouble. You can even tell people she left you. No one would blame you for that. Clara felt Sawyer's body tense beside her. For one horrifying moment, she wondered if he might be considering it. Then he said, I have a counteroffer. Oh, you leave now, and you tell Judge Weston that if he wants his daughter, he will have to come get her himself, because I am not handing her over to hired muscle and a woman whose only talent is manipulating men. Victoria's smile vanished. You are making a mistake. Would not be my first. Sawyer's voice dropped to a dangerous low. Now get off my property before, I forget I am trying to be civilized. The scarred marshal reached for his gun. Gideon was faster. His weapon was in his hand before the marshal could draw the barrel aimed squarely at the man's chest. Try it, Gideon growled, his voice like thunder. I have been wanting an excuse to shoot someone for years. Tension thick as honey hung in the air. No one moved. No one breathed. Then Victoria pulled her horse's reins, turning away. This is not over. I know. My husband will destroy you. Both of you. Let him try. Victoria rode away, the two marshals following. But the look she gave Clara before she disappeared, full of promise, violence, and revenge, would haunt her long after the hoofbeats faded to silence. That night, the four of them sat around the table in the flickering lamplight. "She will come back," Gideon said, leaning back in his chair, "with more men." "I know." Sawyer turned his whiskey glass in his hands. "But we bought ourselves time." "Time for what?" Clara asked. "To find a way to fight back." Sawyer looked at her. "Your father is a federal judge. That means he has enemies. Other judges who do not like his rulings. Lawyers he has crossed. Politicians he has blocked." His eyes were hard as flint. "We find those people. We make them allies. That could take months. Then we have work to do." Emmett, who had been silent throughout the conversation, finally spoke up. "I have some connections from my cattle driving days. People who owe me favors. I can send telegrams, see what I can dig up." "Good," Sawyer nodded. "Gideon, you are our defense. If those marshals come back, or anyone else Victoria sends you, are the first line." Gideon's face split into a fierce grin. "Been waiting for an excuse to shoot someone for a long time. No killing unless absolutely necessary. We need the law on our side." "Fine, just a wounding then." Claire placed her hand on the table. "What about me? What can I do?" Sawyer looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "You mentioned your mother left you money. How much?" "I do not know exactly, but my father used to brag that her estate was worth over $60,000. Gideon nearly choked on his coffee. "That is a fortune. And it all should have gone to Clara when she turned 21. Sawyer's mind was clearly working through a plan. "So where did it go?" "My father said I had already spent it, but I had not touched a penny. Then he stole it, probably moved it into accounts under his wife's name." Sawyer began to pace. "If we can prove that, if we can show he embezzled his own daughter's inheritance, we can bring him down." "But how do we prove it?" Clara asked. "We make him admit it." Sawyer stopped and looked at her. "We set a trap. Make him think he has won, and when he comes to gloat, we get him on record." It was a dangerous plan, perhaps an impossible one, but it was the only plan they had. The days stretched into weeks. Clara grew stronger with each passing day. Every morning she and Sawyer practiced shooting. By the end of the first week, she could hit 4 of 6 targets. By the end of the second, she could reload without fumbling. By the 15th day, she could draw and fire in under 3 seconds. Not fast enough to outdraw a real gunfighter, but fast enough to make someone think twice. "You are a natural," Sawyer said on the 16th morning as she hit 5 cans in a row. "Better than most men I have seen." "That is because most men think they already know everything." Clara reloaded and aimed again. "I know I do not." "Smart." He leaned against a tree, watching her. "You keep that attitude, you will outlive all of us." The words hung in the air for a moment. Then Clara lowered the gun and turned to face him. "Can I ask you something?" "You are going to anyway. Why did you really say yes that first day when I asked you to marry me? And do not tell me it was just because you were tired of being alone. There is more to it than that." Sawyer was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "Aisha, my sister." "Lily." Clara's breath caught. "Emmett told me a little, but I did not want to push. You have eyes like her, not the color." Lily's eyes were brown, but the look, the determination, the fire. He paused. "Lily begged me not to go that day. When I rode out to work the cattle, she held my hand and said, 'Brother, please do not go. I am scared.' And his voice broke. I told her it was just a cold, that I would be back in a few days. That was not your fault." "Was it not?" He looked at her, his whiskey amber eyes full of old pain. I chose work over family. That choice killed her. No, the fever killed her. You were just trying to survive. Survival does not mean much if you lose everyone worth surviving for. He met her eyes. That is why I said yes to you, Clara, because I was not going to make the same mistake twice. Someone needed help, and this time I was going to be there. Clara wanted to say something wise, something comforting. Instead, she reached up and touched his face. His skin was warm beneath her palm, rough with stubble and years of sun and wind. He did not move, did not breathe, just looked at her with eyes that held everything he could not say. Thank you, she whispered, for being here. Do not thank me yet. His voice was rough. Victoria's still out there. Your father still wants you. And he swallowed. I do not know if I can protect you forever. You do not have to protect me forever. Clara smiled. You just have to teach me how to protect myself. I am teaching you. Then I will be fine. He looked at her for a long moment. Then slowly he placed his hand over hers, the hand still touching his face. You scare me, Clara Weston. Why, because I am starting to care about you, and things I care about have a way of being taken from me. Then do not let anyone take me. That night, Clara could not sleep. She lay in the darkness, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling around her. The creak of wood, the distant call of an owl, the wind whispering through the pine trees. She thought about Sawyer, about the way he looked at her, about the way his hand had felt over hers, about the way something in her chest tightened every time he walked into a room. She was falling for him. She knew it, and it terrified her because men had hurt her before. Thomas Brennan had stolen her money. Her father had stolen her future. And every man she had ever trusted had eventually proven himself unworthy of that trust. But Sawyer was different. Or was he? She rose from the bed and walked to the window, looking out at the moonlit yard. The mountains rose in the distance, silver and black against the star-filled sky. And then she saw him. Sawyer was sitting on the fence near the barn, his back to the house, his face turned up toward the moon. He sat utterly still like a statue carved from stone. Before she could think better of it, Clara pulled on her shawl and walked outside. He did not turn when she approached, did not acknowledge her presence until she was standing right beside him. Could not sleep, he asked. No, me either. She climbed up onto the fence beside him, sitting close enough that their shoulders almost touched. What do you think about out here, she asked. Lily, sometimes. He was quiet for a long moment. Sometimes I think about all the ways my life could have been different. If I had stayed that day, if she had lived, if I had made different choices. And what do you conclude? That the past is the past, that it cannot be changed. He looked at her, that the only thing that matters is what happens next. The moonlight cast silver shadows across his face, softening the hard lines, making him look younger than his 32 years. In this light, she could see the man he might have been, the man he could still become. Sawyer, she said softly. Yes. I am glad I stopped your horse that day. He turned to look at her. The moonlight caught his amber eyes, making them glow like whiskey held up to candlelight. So am I, he said. And there, under the Colorado moon, with the whole world sleeping around them, something changed between them. Not a kiss, not a declaration, just a moment of understanding, a moment of connection, a beginning. Emmett returned from Denver on the 21st day with news that could change everything. Judge Weston has been under investigation for the past 6 months. He dropped a stack of papers on the table, breathing hard from the fast ride. Financial irregularities, missing estate funds. The Philadelphia district attorney is building a case. Sawyer picked up the papers. You are sure about this? Contacted lawyers in Philadelphia. Turns out the judge has a lot of enemies. And when I mentioned Clara's situation, 3 different attorneys said the same thing. They have been waiting for someone to come forward with evidence of his corruption. Clara's knees went weak. They can prove he stole from me. They can prove he stole from a lot of people. Emmett pulled out a folder. I have statements here from two of them confirming that your mother's estate was worth over $60,000 and that none of it was ever transferred to you despite the will explicitly stating you were the sole heir. That does not prove, Gideon began. It proves he stole from his own daughter, which makes every charge he has filed against her suspect at best fraudulent, at worst. Emmett looked at Clara. You were right. He moved the money into Victoria's accounts, but he got greedy, started using it for investments, political bribes, left a paper trail a mile wide. Clara's world tilted. You can prove all this. I can prove enough that any honest judge will throw out his warrants and start an investigation. Emmett smiled. You are not going back to Philadelphia, Mrs. Callahan. Your father is. For the first time since she had seen Victoria in Stone Ridge, Clara allowed herself to hope. But hope did not last long. That evening, Dr. Samuel Morrison, the town physician, rode up to Blackwood Ranch at a frantic pace. Sawyer. Morrison pulled his horse to a stop, face flushed. There is trouble. What kind of trouble? The kind that involves federal marshals and arrest warrants. Morrison dismounted quickly. Mrs. Weston Victoria, she went to Sheriff Garrett this morning with papers claiming Clara is wanted for theft in Philadelphia. Says she stole over $10,000 in jewelry and securities. Clara's stomach dropped. That is a lie. I know it is, but the paperwork looks real. Garrett is getting pressure from the mayor to arrest you. Morrison looked at Sawyer. She is claiming you are harboring a fugitive. Says if you do not turn Clara over by sundown tomorrow, they will arrest you too. Let them try. Sawyer's voice was cold as mountain ice. Sawyer, these are federal charges. Real or not, they carry weight. Morrison's expression was grim. If they arrest her, she will be extradited to Philadelphia. And once she is there, she will disappear into an asylum, Clara finished. That was always the plan. Accuse me of a crime, have me declared unstable, commit me. No one questions a judge putting his troubled daughter away for her own good. Over my dead body, Gideon snarled. That can be arranged too. The voice came from the path behind them. They all turned. Victoria was riding toward them, flanked by the two marshals and this time Sheriff Garrett. Her face held an expression of triumph. Hello, Clara. I told you this was not over. Clara stepped forward, standing beside Sawyer, not behind him. Victoria, I see you brought more dogs this time. I brought the law. Victoria pointed at Garrett. The sheriff has agreed that your behavior has been concerning, and given the evidence of your crimes. What crimes? Sawyer cut in. The only crime here is a corrupt judge stealing from his own daughter. Victoria's smile did not waver. Such creative accusations. Unfortunately, they will not hold up in court, especially when the judge in question is the one signing the warrants. His warrants are worthless. Dr. Morrison stepped forward. I have been in contact with attorneys in Philadelphia. Judge Weston is under investigation for embezzlement and fraud. Any warrants he has issued are suspect. For a moment, Victoria's confidence faltered, but she recovered quickly. Investigations can be redirected, and in the meantime, my stepdaughter is still wanted for theft. She looked at Garrett. Sheriff, do your duty. Garrett looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Callahan, I am afraid I am going to need you to come with us, just until this gets sorted out. No, Sawyer's hand moved to his gun. Sawyer, do not make this harder than it needs to be. I said no. Gideon had already moved to block one side of Clara. Emmett stood at the other. 3 men formed a wall between her and those who would take her away. Victoria laughed. How touching! 3 broken men protecting a thief. We are not broken, Emmett said quietly. We are just tired of watching good people suffer. And we are not letting you take her. Gideon added, his voice like thunder. Sheriff Garrett looked around at the three armed men, all of them ready to die to protect a woman they had barely known, and something in his eyes changed. "Mrs. Weston," he said slowly, "I think perhaps we should wait until those investigations in Philadelphia are resolved. If Judge Weston is under suspicion, I am paying you to arrest her, not to think. You are not paying me anything." Garrett's voice hardened. "And I do not take orders from civilians, even rich ones." Victoria's face twisted with rage. "You will all regret this, every single one of you." "Maybe." Sawyer's voice was cold, "but not today." Victoria turned to her horse and rode away. The marshals followed, but Sheriff Garrett stayed. "Sawyer," he dismounted, "I owe you an apology. I should have looked into this more carefully before I let that woman push me around." "Yes, you should have. I am going to do some digging of my own, see what I can find out about Judge Weston." Garrett looked at Clara. "Ma'am, for what it is worth, I believe you. And if there is anything I can do to help set this right, you let me know." Clara did not know what to say, so she simply nodded. Garrett mounted his horse and rode away, leaving them standing in the yard with the sunset fading and the feeling that the war had only just begun. "That was too easy," Gideon muttered. "I know." Sawyer's eyes were on the horizon where Victoria had disappeared. "She is planning something, something bigger." "What do we do?" Sawyer looked at Clara, the woman who had walked into his life 3 weeks ago and somehow changed everything. "We prepare," he said, "for whatever comes next." And what came next, none of them could have predicted. Because that night, over the mountains above Stone Ridge, clouds began to gather. Black, dense, moving faster than any storm the oldest residents had ever seen, and carrying with them something that would change everything. The sky had been wrong all morning. Clara stood on the porch of the ranch house, watching clouds pile upon clouds over the distant peaks. They were not ordinary storm clouds. These were black as coal, dense as iron, and moving with a speed that defied nature. They rolled down from the high country like an avalanche of darkness, swallowing the blue sky inch by inch. 3 days had passed since the second confrontation with Victoria. 3 days of waiting. 3 days of wondering when the next attack would come. But the attack that arrived was not the one any of them expected. "Storm is coming," Emmett said, stepping onto the porch beside her. His dark brown eyes studied the horizon with the careful attention of a man who had spent decades reading weather and land. A cup of coffee sat forgotten in his hand, gone cold. "Big one." "How big?" Clara asked. "Big enough to worry about." Sawyer emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He stopped in the yard and looked up at the sky, and something in his expression made Clara's stomach tighten. "Those clouds are moving wrong," he said, "coming down from the high country too fast. This is not normal weather." "What does that mean?" "Means the river is going to rise fast. Snow melt from the peaks combined with whatever rain this brings." He paused, and she could see his mind working through possibilities, none of them good. The town. What about the town? Stone Ridge sits in a low valley. If the river breaks its banks. He did not need to finish the sentence. Clara had seen floods before. On her grandfather's farm in Pennsylvania when she was just a child, she had watched the creek behind the house transform from a gentle stream into a roaring monster that swallowed fences and drowned livestock. She remembered the sound it made, the terrible, hungry sound. "We need to warn them," she said immediately. "I know." Sawyer was already moving toward the barn. "I need to check the upper ridge first, see how much water is coming down." "I am going with you." "No." "Yes." She followed him, matching his long strides with determined ones of her own. "You said we face everything together. That means I do not stay behind while you ride into danger." "Clara, I can ride, I can shoot, and you might need help." She grabbed Thunder's saddle before Sawyer could stop her, pulling it from its rack with strength born of weeks of ranch work. "Either we both go or neither of us goes." Sawyer stared at her for a long moment. She could see the war playing out behind his amber eyes. The instinct to protect her battling against the knowledge that she was right. Then he sighed a sound of surrender. You are going to get us both killed. Probably. She began saddling Thunder with practiced efficiency. But at least we will die together. Despite everything, despite the darkness gathering overhead and the danger they were riding toward, Sawyer Callahan's mouth curved into something that was unmistakably a smile. Small, brief, but real. That is not as comforting as you think it is. They rode out 10 minutes later, leaving Gideon and Emmett to watch over the ranch. The storm was building faster than Sawyer had anticipated, and by the time they reached the upper ridge, rain had begun to fall in sheets so heavy Clara could barely see 10 feet ahead. Thunder seemed to know the path by instinct, following Sawyer's horse through the darkness, with the sure-footed confidence of an animal that had run these trails 1,000 times. When they crested the ridge, what they saw made Clara's blood run cold. The river was already over its banks. Brown water churned and roared, swallowing bushes and rocks along the shore like a hungry beast. And it was rising, fast, faster than she had ever seen water move. Every minute that passed, another inch of land disappeared beneath the flood. Sweet Jesus. Sawyer breathed, his voice nearly lost in the roar of rain and water. The whole snowpack must be melting at once. I have never seen it this high this fast. How long before it reaches town? 2 hours, maybe less. He turned his horse, already calculating distances and times. We need to warn them. Now. The ride down the mountain was nearly suicidal. Rain pounded them like fists. Wind tore at their clothes. The trail, already treacherous, had become a river of mud that threatened to sweep them off the mountainside with every step. Clara clung to Thunder's mane with numb fingers, trusting the horse to find footing where she could see none. They reached Stone Ridge just as the first surge of water hit the lower end of Main Street. Chaos. People were screaming and running in every direction, trying to move belongings and livestock to higher ground. A wagon had overturned in the rising water. Children were crying. Women were shouting the names of husbands and sons. Sawyer rode straight to the sheriff's office and dismounted before his horse had fully stopped. Garrett, he shouted over the roar of rain, the river is breaking. We have maybe an hour before the whole valley floods. Sheriff Garrett came running out, took one look at the water rushing down the street, and his face went pale as death. Sweet Mary and Joseph, we need to evacuate now. Get everyone to the church. It is on the highest ground in town. Sawyer was already moving. Ring the bell. Get every able-bodied man helping. Sawyer, we cannot. We do not have time to argue. Sawyer grabbed the sheriff by his shoulders and shook him once hard. People are going to die if we do not move. Are you going to help, or are you going to stand here debating? Garrett stared at him for 1 second. 2. Then he turned and started shouting orders. What followed was chaos given purpose. Clara and Sawyer split up, racing through the streets, pounding on doors, dragging people out of buildings that were already starting to flood. The water rose faster than anyone could have predicted, turning streets into rivers in minutes. Clara found Mrs. Prescott, the school teacher, trying to save her schoolhouse. The elderly woman was waist-deep in rushing water, struggling to carry armfuls of books. Leave them, Clara shouted over the roar of the flood. They are not worth your life. The children's books can be replaced. Clara grabbed her arm and pulled with all her strength. You cannot. They ran for higher ground together, and Clara felt the moment Mrs. Prescott's foot slipped on the submerged cobblestones. She caught her before she could fall into the rushing current, dragging her back with strength she had not known she possessed. Thank you, Mrs. Prescott gasped. Thank me when we are not drowning. Across town, Sawyer had found something worse. The boarding house on the east side had collapsed, trapping at least 4 people inside. He could hear them screaming, their voices barely audible over the roar of water and rain. Without thinking, he waded into the flood. The water was waist-deep now, and still rising cold as mountain ice, and strong enough to knock a grown man off his feet. He grabbed a piece of debris and pulled then another, tearing away boards and stones with bare hands that were already bleeding. Sawyer Gideon appeared beside him, having ridden into town when he saw the scale of the disaster. "You will get yourself killed. Then help me or get out of the way." They worked together, pulling aside rubble until they could see inside. Three women and a young boy huddled in the corner water, rising around them, their eyes wide with terror. "We are going to get you out," Sawyer shouted, "but you need to move fast." He pulled the first woman out, then the second. Gideon grabbed the boy and lifted him overhead, carrying him to safety. But when Sawyer reached for the third woman, the building shifted, and more debris came crashing down. The woman screamed. Sawyer did not hesitate. He dove back in, ignoring the pain, as a beam caught his shoulder and grabbed her hand. "Hold on to me!" She gripped his hand so hard her nails drew blood. Sawyer pulled with everything he had, and they both fell backward into the rushing water just as the rest of the building collapsed behind them. Gideon pulled them to shore, and the woman sobbed against Sawyer's chest. "Thank you," she gasped. "Thank you, thank you." Save it. Sawyer was already standing, already looking for the next person who needed help. "We are not done yet." On the other side of town, Emmett was doing something no one expected. He had found a family, a young couple with three small children trapped on the second floor of a house that was collapsing into the flood. The stairs were destroyed. Water was rising by the minute. There was no time to find a ladder. Emmett, the 41-year-old man with gray at his temples and hands calloused by decades of honest work, climbed onto the roof of the neighboring building. He judged the distance, said a prayer his wife Mary would have recognized, and jumped. He landed hard on the second-floor balcony, nearly falling, catching himself on the railing at the last moment. Then he smashed through the window. "Give me the children," he shouted to the terrified mother. One by one, he lifted the three children through the window and across to the neighboring roof. Then the mother. Then the father, a man who outweighed Emmett by at least 50 pounds. When they finally reached safe ground, the mother threw her arms around Emmett and wept. "You saved my children. You saved my whole family." Emmett, the man who had lost his wife and daughter 8 years ago, the man who had thought he would never feel anything again, felt tears sting his own eyes. "Get to the church," he said gently. "You will be safe there." The next hour was a blur of water and screaming and desperate rescues. Sawyer pulled a family of 5 from their flooding home. Clara found 2 children trapped on a roof and talked them through climbing down to safety. Gideon carried elderly people on his massive shoulders, moving through chest-deep water like it was nothing. Emmett led horses and cattle to higher ground, saving livestock that represented entire families' livelihoods. And all the while, the water kept rising. By the time they got the last stragglers to the church, the lower half of Stone Ridge was completely underwater. Houses had collapsed. Buildings were torn apart. The general store was gone, entirely swept away by the current. But everyone was alive. Every single person had made it to safety. Sawyer collapsed against the church wall, breathing hard, covered in mud and blood from a dozen scrapes he did not remember getting. His shoulder where the beam had struck throbbed with deep pain, but nothing was broken. He had checked. Clara found him there a moment later and sank down beside him. "We did it," she whispered. "We did." Sawyer looked at her, seeing the exhaustion in her face, the mud in her honey blonde hair, the scratches on her hands. She had never looked more beautiful to him. "You saved them. All of them." "We saved them?" "No." Sheriff Garrett's voice made them both look up. He was standing a few feet away, his face unreadable. "She is right, you saved them. Most of us were still trying to figure out what was happening when you started pulling people out of buildings. Without you," his voice broke, "without you, half this town would be dead." Around them, people were beginning to realize the same thing. The man who had terrified them for 5 years had just risked everything to save their lives. Mrs. Patterson, mother of the young deputy, stepped forward. She was soaking wet, clutching her daughter's tears streaming down her face. "Mr. Callahan," she said, her voice trembling, I am sorry for everything we said about you, everything we believed. She looked at Clara. You are both heroes, and if anyone tries to arrest either of you, they will have to go through this entire town first. She is right. It was the woman Sawyer had rescued from the boarding house. We stand with you, both of you. From now on, Mrs. Prescott added, putting an arm around Clara, anyone who comes for the Callahan family comes for all of us. One by one, people began to nod. Voices murmured agreement. And Sawyer Callahan, the man they had feared for 5 long years, found himself surrounded by the very people who had once crossed the street to avoid him. But before anyone could say more, the church door slammed open. Victoria stood there soaking wet, her perfect dark hair plastered to her skull, her expensive dress ruined by mud. Her face was twisted with rage. Behind her stood the 2 marshals looking equally bedraggled. How touching. Victoria spat the words like venom. The monster plays hero, and suddenly all is forgiven. She pointed at Clara. But the law does not care about heroics. That woman is still wanted for theft, and we are taking her tonight. The hell you are. Michael Patterson, the young deputy, stepped forward with his hand on his gun. The lady stays. You are a deputy. You are sworn to uphold the law. I am sworn to uphold justice. Michael's voice was steady as stone, and there is no justice in what you are doing. The scarred marshal reached for his weapon. Boy, you do not want to do this. Actually, I do. Michael drew his gun, because I am tired of being afraid. Oh, and I am tired of watching good people suffer because we are too scared to do the right thing. Around the room, other men began standing, began reaching for weapons, ready to fight. Victoria's face went white as bone. You are all insane. Maybe. Sawyer stepped forward. But we are insane together, and that makes us dangerous. He looked at the marshals. Your choice, gentlemen. You can try to take my wife and start a war you will not win. Or you can walk away and tell the judge that Stone Ridge does not scare easy. The scarred marshal looked around the room. Dozens of people stared back at him with hard eyes and ready weapons. Men and women who had just survived a flood together, who had just become a community again. Then he holstered his gun. This is not over, he said to Victoria. Like hell it is not, she shrieked. I paid you. You paid us to do a job, not to die. He turned and walked toward the door. Come on, we are leaving. Victoria stood there for one long moment, shaking with rage. Then she looked at Clara. You think you have won. You have won nothing. My husband will destroy you, destroy all of you. Let him try, Clara said quietly, and for the first time she truly believed it. Victoria left, slamming the door so hard the whole building shook. In the silence that followed, no one moved. No one spoke. Then Mrs. Prescott started clapping. The sound was so unexpected that everyone jumped. But then someone else joined in. Then another. Then another. Within seconds, the entire church was applauding, cheering for Sawyer and Clara and Gideon and Emmett. For a marriage that had started as a desperate lie and become something no one had expected. A symbol of hope. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of rain and wind and water that would not stop rising. 3 days of the entire town crammed into the church and the handful of buildings on high ground. 3 days of Sawyer and Clara working side by side, rationing supplies, keeping people calm, caring for the injured. On the 4th morning, the rain finally stopped. The water began to recede, revealing a town that looked like it had been through a war. Half the buildings were gone or damaged beyond repair. The bridge was destroyed. Roads had become channels of mud, but everyone was alive. We will rebuild, Mrs. Prescott said, standing in the church doorway and surveying the damage. We have done it before. We will do it again. Before anyone could respond, Sheriff Garrett came running up with a telegram in his hand, his face flushed. Sawyer, you need to see this. Sawyer took the telegram and read it quickly. Then he read it again. Then he looked up at Garrett with an expression somewhere between shock and disbelief. Is this real? As real as it gets. Garrett was grinning. Judge Weston was arrested yesterday morning in Philadelphia. Embezzlement, fraud, obstruction of justice. The warrant for Clara's arrest has been dismissed. She is free. The words hung in the air for a moment. Then Clara let out a breath she had not realized she had been holding for weeks. I am free, she repeated. You are free. All charges dropped. Victoria fled before they could arrest her too, but they have got warrants out. Garrett's grin faded. Sawyer, I owe you both an apology. I should have believed Clara from the start. Should have stood up to the pressure. Instead, You did your job, Sawyer cut in. Cannot fault a man for that. I can fault myself for not doing it better. Garrett held out his hand. For what it is worth, I am glad I was wrong about you. Both of you. Sawyer shook his hand. Clara collapsed against Sawyer's chest, sobbing so hard her whole body shook. He wrapped his arms around her and held on, letting her cry out weeks of fear and exhaustion and terror that she had tried so hard to keep hidden. Around them, people were starting to notice, starting to whisper, starting to smile. When Clara finally pulled back, her face was blotchy and her eyes were red, and she had never looked more beautiful to him. What happens now? She asked. Now, Sawyer brushed a tear from her cheek. Now you decide what you want. What I want. You are free, Clara. You can go anywhere. Do anything. You are not bound by fear anymore. His throat tightened. Or by me, if that is what you choose. Clara blinked. You think I would leave? I think you came here because you were desperate, and now you are not. His voice was rough. So if you want to go back east or somewhere else or anywhere that is not a broken down ranch with a man who does not know the first thing about making someone happy, I will understand. Sawyer Callahan, you are the stupidest smart man I have ever met. He blinked. What? Do you honestly think I have stayed here the past month just because I had nowhere else to go? She grabbed his face with both hands, forcing him to look at her. I stayed because of you. Because somewhere between that first terrified moment in the street and right now, I fell in love with you. And if you think I am going anywhere without you, you are out of your mind. Sawyer's world tilted. You love me? Of course I love you, you idiot. I have been trying to tell you for weeks, but you are so busy being noble and giving me choices that you will not let me choose you. Clara, I choose you, she said fiercely. I choose this town. I choose this life. I choose everything that comes with being your wife, really your wife, not on paper, not for appearance, for real. He kissed her. He kissed her like she was oxygen and he had been suffocating, like she was light and he had spent years in darkness, like she was the answer to every question he had ever been afraid to ask. And when they finally pulled apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you too, he said quietly. Probably since the moment you made friends with Thunder. Definitely since you learned to shoot. Absolutely since you stood up to Victoria and told her you would not go quietly. Then it is settled. Clara smiled through her tears. We are married, for real this time. No takebacks. No takebacks, Sawyer agreed. Around them, people started cheering. But the surprises were not over yet. 2 days later, as the town began the long process of cleaning up, a stranger rode into Stone Ridge. He was tall, brown hair, brown eyes, a scar on his left hand. Thomas Brennan. Clara saw him first. She was helping Mrs. Prescott sort through salvageable items from the schoolhouse when the man rode up and dismounted, looking around with an expression somewhere between shame and determination. Her blood ran cold. You, she said. Brennan turned. When he saw her, his face went pale. Mrs. Callahan, I was hoping I would find you. Find me, you stole everything I had and left me to die. Clara's voice shook with rage. And now you come back for what? To steal from someone else? No. Brennan held up his hands. I came to return what I took. Clara stared at him. What? Brennan reached into a saddlebag and pulled out a leather pouch. He held it out to her. $2,000. It is everything I took from you, plus interest. I know it does not make up for what I did, but it is a start. Clara did not move to take it. Why would you come back? Because I found out what happened after I left. Brennan's voice was heavy with shame. I heard about Victoria Weston, about what she was trying to do to you, and I realized that I was part of it. She paid me to target you specifically. Said there was a woman coming from Philadelphia who needed to disappear. Gave me your name, your description, told me exactly what to say to gain your trust. Clara felt the ground shift beneath her feet. Victoria hired you. She wanted you alone and desperate, wanted you so far from help that when she came for you, no one would believe your story. Brennan looked down at the money in his hands. I did not know. Or maybe I did not want to know, but when I heard about the flood, about how you saved all those people, about how the whole town stood up for you, he swallowed. I could not live with myself anymore. So you came back. I came back. He held out the money again. I know it does not fix anything, but maybe it can help rebuild what was lost. The schoolhouse, the church, whatever you want. Clara looked at the money, $2,000. More money than she had seen in months, and she knew exactly what she wanted to do with it. Mrs. Prescott, she called. The schoolteacher came over looking at Brennan with obvious suspicion. This man has made a donation to the rebuilding fund, Clara said. $2,000 for the schoolhouse and the church. Mrs. Prescott's eyes went wide. $2,000 for the town. Clara looked at Brenda. Not for me. I do not want anything that came from Victoria's schemes, but the town can use it. Brennan nodded slowly. That seems fair. And Mr. Brennan, nah, Clara's voice hardened. If you ever steal from anyone again, I will find you, and I will make sure justice is served. Understood? Understood. He mounted his horse and rode away without another word. Mrs. Prescott stared at Clara. Did you just give away $2,000? I gave away blood money. Clara smiled. And I gained something much more valuable. What is that closure? 1 week later, when the rebuilding had begun in earnest and the new church was nearly finished, Ms. Prescott made an announcement. We are having a celebration next week for everyone who helped rebuild, everyone who survived, everyone who makes this town what it is. But what Mrs. Prescott did not tell anyone was that the celebration had a second purpose, a purpose only she and Dr. Morrison and a handful of others knew about, a real wedding. The day arrived with perfect weather, clear skies, warm sun, the kind of day that felt like a gift from heaven itself. People gathered at the new church wearing their best clothes, laughing and talking and celebrating life. Clara stood at the entrance in a simple white dress that Mrs. Prescott had given her. It had belonged to the teacher's daughter who had passed away years before. Her honey blonde hair was pinned with wildflower and her hands were trembling. Ready, Mrs. Prescott asked. I have been ready since the day I stepped in front of his horse, Clara said. The doors opened, and there at the front of the church, wearing a clean shirt and looking nervous as hell, stood Sawyer Callahan. Beside him was Gideon, the man who had thought he would die with the ghosts of Gettysburg, now standing as best man, with a rare smile on his weathered face. And Emmett, the man who had lost everything and found a reason to live again, stood in the front row with tears in his eyes. Clara walked down the aisle slowly, taking in every face. The people who had doubted her, the people who had defended her, the people who had become family when she needed it most. When she reached Sawyer, he took her hands, and she could feel how hard his heart was beating. Hi, he whispered. Hi yourself. The preacher, an old man who had survived the flood and insisted on officiating despite his bad leg, cleared his throat. Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to witness something extraordinary. Not just a wedding, but a second chance, a new beginning, a promise made not out of fear, but out of love. He looked at Sawyer and Clara. These two people came together in darkness and found light. They faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. They taught this town what it means to stand for something, and now they are going to teach us what it means to love. They exchanged their vows' voices, clear and steady, and when it came time for Sawyer to speak his own words, he took a breath and said what he had been practicing for weeks. Clara, when you stepped in front of my horse that day, I thought you were the bravest person I had ever met. And I was right, but you are also the kindest, the strongest, the most stubborn. People laughed softly. You took a broken man who had given up on the world and showed him that there was still something worth fighting for. You turned a house into a home, a lie into truth, fear into love. And you did it all while facing down corrupt judges and federal marshals and floods that should have destroyed us. His voice roughened. I do not deserve you. But I am going to spend every day of the rest of my life trying to be the man you see when you look at me. I love you, and I promise no matter what comes, we face it together. Clara was crying openly now. Sawyer, I came west looking for someone to save me, but you did not save me. You gave me the tools to save myself. You taught me to shoot, to stand up for what is right, to believe that I was worth fighting for. And somewhere in all that, you became the person I could not imagine living without. She squeezed his hands. I love you, not because you are perfect, but because you are real. Because you see me, all of me, and you love me anyway. And I promise that no matter what happens, no matter where life takes us, I am choosing you. Today, tomorrow, forever. The preacher smiled. Then by the power vested in me by Colorado territory, in the grace of God, I now pronounce you husband and wife again. He paused. Sawyer, you may kiss your bride. For real this time. And Sawyer did. He kissed her like she was everything he had ever wanted and never believed he could have. And when they finally pulled apart, both breathless and grinning, the church erupted in cheers. Later, as the sun set over the rebuilding town, Sawyer and Clara stood on the church steps and watched their community, their family celebrate the life they had built together. Happy, Sawyer asked, more than I ever thought possible. Clara leaned against his shoulder. You, I did not know I could be this happy. She smiled. Good, because you are stuck with me now. Promise, promise, Gideon approached them, a rare smile softening his weathered features. Never thought I would see this day, he said. Sawyer Callahan married and smiling. World must be ending. Maybe it is just beginning, Emmett said, joining them. His dark eyes were warm. Beginnings are good. I should know. Clara looked at the three men who had become her family. The commander, the protector, the bridge. Three broken souls who had found their way back to life. Thank you, she said softly, all of you, for taking a chance on a desperate woman who stopped a stranger's horse. Thank you, Emmett replied, for reminding us that family is not just about blood. It is about who shows up. As the celebration continued around them, Clara thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The desperation that had driven her to kneel in the dust of Main Street. The courage she had found in herself, the love she had discovered in the most unexpected place. She thought about her mother who had died too young, about the inheritance that had been stolen, about the stepmother who had tried to destroy her. And she thought about what came next, because the woman who had begged the most feared cowboy in the West to marry her had not just saved herself, she had saved him. She had saved Gideon, who was learning to sleep again one peaceful night at a time. She had saved Emmett, who had found in her a daughter he thought he would never have again. She had saved a whole town that had forgotten what it meant to stand together. She had saved the idea that second chances were possible for anyone brave enough to ask. And Sawyer Callahan, the man everyone had feared for 5 long years, had proven that sometimes the people the world calls monsters are just heroes waiting for someone to believe in them. Together, they had turned a lie into truth, strangers into family, fear into love, and a broken frontier town into a place where courage mattered more than reputation, where standing together meant more than standing alone, where two people who had started with nothing but desperation had built a life worth living. They did not just survive, they thrived. And they taught everyone watching that the bravest thing anyone can do is ask for help, stand up for what is right, and love someone fiercely enough to change the world. As the last light of day painted everything gold, Sawyer pulled Clara close and whispered in her ear, "So what happens now, Mrs. Callahan?" Clara smiled, looking out at the town they would help rebuild, at the family they had created, at the future stretching before them like an endless Colorado sky. "Now, she said, "we live." And they did. For the rest of their days, Sawyer and Clara Callahan lived and loved and built something beautiful from the ashes of their broken pasts. They raised children who knew the value of courage. They grew old together on the ranch that had once been a place of solitude and became a home filled with laughter. Gideon eventually found his own peace, marrying a widow from town who understood about ghosts and nightmares in the long road home from war. Emmett lived to see grandchildren play in the same yard where he had once buried his grief. He died peacefully in his sleep at 82, with a smile on his face and Mary's name on his lips. And the story of the desperate woman who had stopped a stranger's horse became legend in Stone Ridge. Parents told it to their children. Grandparents told it to their grandchildren. It became a reminder that hope could be found in the darkest moments, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. Because Clara Weston, who had knelt in the dust of Main Street with nothing left to lose, had proven something that everyone needs to remember. Asking for help is not weakness. It is the beginning of everything.